Imagine a world where everything you thought you knew about financial stability evaporates in a matter of days. We often talk about the Great Depression in terms of dry numbers in history textbooks, stock market crashes, unemployment graphs, bank runs, and long winding lines for free soup. But the true visceral story of survival wasn't written on Wall Street or in the echoing halls of government. It was written in cramped, modest household kitchens where ordinary mothers had to perform daily, seemingly impossible miracles to feed and clothe their families when there wasn't a single cent left in the household purse. Today, we live in an era of absolute, unprecedented abundance. Groceries are delivered to our front doors with the simple tap of a glass screen, and clothing is casually thrown into the trash simply because it has gone out of style or lost a button. But the hidden, dangerous price of this modern comfort is our complete helplessness in the face of a genuine crisis. The survival secrets of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers are not just quaint, nostalgic tales to be read and immediately forgotten. They are a harsh, battle-tested manual for survival that has the power to drastically slash your modern living expenses. If you have the courage to apply this forgotten, brilliant wisdom today. The first and most crucial secret of the Great Depression era did not revolve around a specific recipe, a coupon, or a clever budgeting trick. It was a fundamental seismic shift in human mindset. Today, our immediate knee-jerk reaction to almost any household need is consumption. If a shirt tears, we buy a new one. If we crave a sweet treat, we drive to the store. If a tool breaks, we order a replacement online with next-day shipping. In the 1930s, that modern mechanism of instant gratification was completely broken and unavailable. A housewife's first thought during that desperate decade was fundamentally different. How can I make this out of what I already have? It was a time when the very concept of waste simply ceased to exist in the American vocabulary. Absolutely every single object that entered the home was viewed through the critical lens of its potential second, third, and fourth life. And the most vivid, tangible, and beautiful symbol of this astonishing shift in resourcefulness was the humble flour sack. Before the economic crash, farm feed, flour, and sugar were sold in plain, rough, tightly woven cotton canvas bags. When the Depression hit and household clothing budgets dropped to absolute zero, women across the country began meticulously unpicking the tight seams of these heavy industrial sacks. They would rigorously wash the coarse fabric, boil it in large pots with harsh lye soap, bleach it in the hot summer sun to remove the industrial smells, and painstakingly sew it into everyday clothing for their children, durable underwear, absorbent dish towels, and even window curtains. What initially began as a stark marker of desperate, grinding poverty quickly evolved into an incredible nationwide phenomenon of human adaptation and resilience. And then, something truly remarkable happened in the corporate world. The massive manufacturers of flour and animal feed began to notice what these struggling, innovative women were doing with their packaging. Instead of ignoring the trend or switching to cheaper paper alternatives to save money, they completely revolutionized their marketing strategies to support the movement. They began printing bright, cheerful floral patterns, bold geometric designs, and whimsical children's illustrations directly onto the cotton sacks. Furthermore, they formulated special water-soluble inks for their bold company logos and nutritional information, ensuring that housewives could easily wash away the commercial branding, leaving behind a pristine, continuous piece of beautifully patterned fabric. Suddenly, the intense competition between major agricultural brands wasn't just about the quality of the milled wheat or the nutritional value of the chicken feed. It was heavily dependent on whose fabric print was the most fashionable and desirable. Husbands who were sent to the local general store were given strict, non-negotiable instructions by their wives. Only buy the flour in the sack with the blue daisies and yellow stems. I need exactly one more of that specific pattern to finish making Mary's Sunday dress. Historical estimates suggest that during the darkest, most unforgiving years of the Great Depression, approximately 3.5 million women and children in the United States were wearing garments constructed entirely from repurposed feed and flour sacks. This was an entire generation raised, clothed, and protected in cotton that was originally manufactured to hold pig feed and chicken scratch. When we look back at this nationwide phenomenon from our current vantage point, it seems almost incomprehensible. We live deeply entrenched in the toxic, wasteful cycle of fast fashion, where a synthetic, mass-produced t-shirt is worn twice and then casually discarded, destined to sit in a landfill for centuries without decomposing. We spend massive portions of our income trying to project a certain image of wealth, completely losing sight of the inherent, practical value of the materials themselves. The women of the 1930s were not just saving pennies out of necessity, they were fiercely maintaining their family's dignity and pride in the face of absolute destitution. They took coarse, industrial waste, and armed with nothing but a sharp needle, a spool of thread and infinite patience, transformed it into beautiful tailored dresses adorned with ruffles, pockets, and pleats, so their children wouldn't feel the crushing, humiliating weight of their poverty when they went to school. This underlying principle, the profound ability to see immense value exactly where others see only trash, is the absolute cornerstone of true, impactful frugality. If we can adopt even a fraction of this deep respect for physical resources, choosing to repair instead of replacing and reimagining instead of discarding, our modern household budgets would transform overnight. The flour sack revolution teaches us a timeless lesson. True wealth isn't about what you can afford to passively buy from a store. It's about what you can manage to brilliantly create from absolutely nothing. Let's travel from the sewing table directly into the heart of the Depression-era kitchen. Imagine, for a moment, that you are preparing to make a family meal, and you open your pantry door only to find that the shelves are agonizingly bare. You have absolutely no fresh milk. There is no butter to be found. You are completely out of eggs. There are no fresh fruits, no seasonal berries, no expensive chocolates, and no rich nuts. All you have at your disposal is a meager amount of basic flour, some refined sugar, a small remnant of rendered pork fat or lard, and water flowing from the tap. Now, add to this bleak scenario the fact that today is Sunday, and your children, who are exhausted from the constant grinding atmosphere of anxiety and scarcity that hangs heavy in the air, are desperately hoping for some small comfort. They are waiting for a dessert. A modern consumer placed in this exact situation would simply throw up their hands in defeat, apologize, and serve nothing. But the resourceful homemakers of the 1930s possessed a seemingly magical ability to conjure the comforting illusion of a normal, abundant life out of absolute emptiness. It was precisely out of this desperate culinary landscape that one of the most astonishing baking inventions in American history was born: the water pie. At first glance, the very concept of the water pie seems like a cruel joke or a violation of common culinary sense. How on earth can anyone possibly bake a pie where the primary filling consists of nothing more than hot water? But therein lies the absolute genius of survival cooking. The foundation of this miraculous dessert was the simplest, most basic pie crust imaginable, cobbled together from basic flour, a pinch of salt, and whatever cheap fat was available, most commonly harsh, rendered lard. This utilitarian dough was rolled out and carefully fitted into a tin pie pan. But what happened next was a breathtaking act of culinary alchemy, built entirely on basic chemistry, blind faith, and desperate ingenuity. Into this raw, unbaked shell, the baker would pour hot water. Just plain hot water, filling the crust almost to the very brim. Then, in a separate, small bowl, they would whisk together a few spoonfuls of flour and sugar. This dry mixture was then delicately and evenly dusted directly over the surface of the pool of water inside the crust. If the family was lucky enough to possess a precious bottle of vanilla extract, a few drops were carefully added. If there was a tiny microscopic scraping of butter left in the icebox, it was cut into tiny flecks and scattered across the top. The most critical rule of the water pie was that under no circumstances could you stir the mixture. In this bizarre liquid state, essentially a puddle of sweet water in a pastry shell, it was gingerly transferred into a hot oven. What occurred inside the dark heat of that oven was a glorious triumph of hope over grim circumstances. As the pie baked, the hot water would begin to fiercely boil and bubble. The dry mixture of flour and sugar resting on the surface would slowly sink to the bottom, hydrating, gelatinizing, and reacting with the heat. By the time the edges of the lard crust turned a perfect flaky golden brown, the plain water inside had miraculously transformed into a thick, translucent, bubbling sweet custard. When the pie was carefully removed from the oven and allowed to completely cool, the filling set up firmly, achieving the dense, satisfying consistency of a rich gel or set pudding. When sliced, it held its shape perfectly. The taste was remarkably similar to a smooth, buttery vanilla caramel, boasting a rich, comforting texture. And this was achieved despite the fact that the interior was entirely devoid of dairy, eggs, or traditional binding agents. It was a sweet, deeply soothing dessert that successfully manufactured the warm illusion of prosperity and well-being in the very moments when the world outside the kitchen window was falling apart. Today, we routinely walk into a local coffee shop and thoughtlessly hand over $6 or $7 for a single cup of heavily sweetened coffee mixed with premium milk and artificial syrups. We regularly purchase prepackaged, mass-produced desserts whose ingredient lists are so long and complex they read like a chemistry textbook, taking up half the cardboard box. We have become entirely dependent on expensive, highly processed, and complicated components to experience culinary joy. The water pie is not merely a fascinating historical curiosity to be chuckled at. It serves as a powerful, humbling lesson that taste, satisfaction, and comfort are not inherently tied to the amount of money spent at a luxury supermarket. There was an entire category of these illusion foods during the Depression. Consider the famous mock apple pie, a dessert that utilized inexpensive, shelf-stable Ritz crackers, heavily seasoned with cinnamon and a splash of lemon juice. Once baked within a crust, the crackers astonishingly mimicked both the precise texture and the tart, spiced flavor of real baked apples, which were a costly luxury many could not afford. These brilliant recipes prove an undeniable truth that modern society has largely forgotten. Masterful cooking is fundamentally about technique, imagination, and resourcefulness, not just the mindless assembly of expensive, premium ingredients. When we complain today that eating well or feeding a family quality food costs too much money, we completely ignore the fact that our grandmothers could manifest a legitimate culinary masterpiece using nothing but tap water, flour, and sugar. Their deep, intuitive understanding of how basic ingredients interact under heat gave them absolute freedom from the grocery store. If you can dedicate the time to master the lost art of creating incredible meals from the most basic, inexpensive, unprocessed staples, bulk grains, simple flours, hearty root vegetables, and fundamental spices, your monthly grocery bill will plummet exponentially. Paradoxically, by stripping away the expensive prepackaged crutches, the actual quality, healthfulness, and satisfaction of your daily meals will inevitably rise. We are currently living through an era of profound systemic food amnesia. With the invention and mass adoption of the modern electric refrigerator, we have collectively forgotten the crucial knowledge of how raw foods naturally interact with time, temperature, and their surrounding environment. We absent-mindedly dump all of our weekly groceries into the glowing plastic bins of the massive, power-hungry monolith humming in our kitchens. And yet, despite this technology, we still find ourselves throwing away bags of slimy, liquefied greens, containers of fuzzy, mold-covered berries, and deeply shriveled, unrecognizable vegetables every single week. The statistics are staggering. In the United States today, it is estimated that between 30 to 40% of all food produced is ultimately thrown into the garbage. We demand the luxury of buying fresh strawberries in the dead of January, and then we act surprised when they lack any real flavor and begin to rot within 48 hours of bringing them home. During the unforgiving years of the Great Depression, this level of casual, everyday wastefulness was not merely considered a moral sin. It was literally a matter of life and death, and the ultimate secret to keeping an entire autumn harvest fresh, crisp, and edible throughout the long, brutal winter without using a single kilowatt of electricity was the traditional root cellar. A proper root cellar was never just a dark, dirty hole dug into the ground. It was a highly calculated, surprisingly sophisticated piece of mid-century architectural climate control that perfectly harnessed the natural, stabilizing thermal properties of the Earth. By excavating below the local frost line, the temperature within the cellar remained incredibly stable all year round, consistently cool, typically hovering just above freezing, but fundamentally protected from the deadly winter frosts that would destroy the cell walls of vegetables. When this natural thermal regulation was combined with a carefully designed ventilation system utilizing intake and exhaust pipes to strictly control humidity levels and air circulation, the cellar transformed into a massive, naturally powered refrigerator, perfectly scaled to sustain a family for months. But the survival strategy did not end with the architecture. Simply tossing a pile of vegetables into a cold basement was a guaranteed recipe for rot. The Housewives of the Depression era possessed a complex, highly nuanced, and scientifically sound understanding of the specific storage requirements for every single variety of produce they harvested. You could not, for instance, simply leave carrots, beets, and parsnips sitting exposed in a woven basket. They would rapidly lose their high water content to the air, becoming limp, rubbery, and completely inedible within weeks. Instead, these precious root vegetables were meticulously packed, layer by careful layer, into sturdy wooden crates. Between each layer, the vegetables were completely encased in slightly damp sand or untreated sawdust. The damp sand served a dual purpose. It completely halted the evaporation of the vegetables' natural moisture, keeping them remarkably crisp, and it provided a physical barrier so that no two vegetables were touching. If one single carrot began to harbor a fungal rot, the sand isolated the decay, effectively saving the rest of the crate's precious contents. Packed this way, root vegetables would snap with fresh moisture well into the late spring. Cabbages required an entirely different strategy. They were pulled from the earth with their massive root systems completely intact and hung upside down from the heavy wooden beams of the cellar ceiling. By leaving the roots attached, the dense cabbage head could slowly draw residual moisture from the root structure, preventing the leaves from wilting over the course of several dark, freezing months. Apples, a vital source of winter sweetness, were stored on dedicated wooden racks, and they were always kept as far away from the potato bins as physically possible. Why? Because our great-grandmothers, without the benefit of modern scientific laboratory analysis, intimately knew a chemical truth that many modern consumers still do not understand today. Ripening apples naturally emit high levels of ethylene gas. Ethylene is a powerful invisible ripening agent that forces surrounding produce to mature and subsequently rot at an accelerated pace, and it specifically triggers potatoes to rapidly break dormancy and sprout massive useless eyes. Furthermore, each individual apple intended for long-term storage was frequently wrapped in a single page of old newspaper to prevent the skin-to-skin transmission of mold spores. The age-old proverb that one bad apple spoils the whole barrel was not merely a quaint metaphor for human behavior. It was a harsh, literal survival rule that dictated the necessity of a strict, weekly physical inspection of the cellar's inventory to cull any turning fruit before it caused a chain reaction of devastating loss. What we today view as the mundane weekly chore of driving to a brightly lit supermarket was, for them, a dedicated art of microclimate management and preservation. They fermented crocks of cabbage into vitamin-rich sauerkraut, salt-cured heavily butchered meats, aggressively sun-dried beans and sliced apples on tin roofs, and boiled down any available berries into dense sugary jams. Every single sealed glass mason jar and every heavy sand-filled wooden crate was a literal investment in the family's ability to survive the winter. If we honestly examine our modern grocery receipts, a massive percentage of our monthly budget is spent specifically on fresh produce. Produce that we routinely allow to rot simply because we don't know how to store it. Understanding basic principles, like knowing which foods actively degrade in the cold of a refrigerator, such as tomatoes, which suffer cell wall damage and lose all flavor, or onions, which turn to mush in high humidity. And utilizing old-world preservation techniques is a lost survival skill. Reclaiming this knowledge could effortlessly save a modern household thousands of dollars a year, simply by preventing your hard-earned money from turning into liquefied compost at the bottom of a crisper drawer. There inevitably came a time in the deepest, most grueling stretches of the Depression when the carefully managed supplies in the root cellar finally began to dwindle, and the glass jars in the pantry sat empty and echoing. When all traditional food reserves were exhausted, families were forced to turn their eyes outward, seeking sustenance in the very places where a modern, comfortable homeowner sees only an unkempt lawn or an irritating weed problem. This was the grueling art of foraging, the ability to identify, harvest, and prepare wild, edible plants growing freely in the untamed margins of the world, right outside their front doors. Today, foraging has experienced a bizarre cultural renaissance, becoming a highly trendy, elitist hobby championed by Michelin-starred restaurant chefs. In high-end luxury organic supermarkets, you can easily find small curated bundles of wild ramps or delicate foraged greens selling for astronomical, eye-watering prices. But in the 1930s, foraging was not a whimsical weekend activity. It was an act of desperate necessity and, most painfully, a glaring, undeniable public marker of extreme poverty. There was an immense, crushing social stigma attached to the act of foraging during the Depression. For a neighbor to look out their window and see a mother slowly walking along the dusty, soot-covered edges of the railroad tracks or wandering through abandoned, overgrown, vacant lots with a woven basket, digging up weeds with a dull knife, meant only one thing. Her husband was out of work, and her family was officially starving. Because of this deep shame, people went to great lengths to hide their activities. Women and children would often forage in the very early, misty hours of the morning or during the fading light of dusk, staying as far away from the prying, judgmental eyes of their neighbors as possible to preserve whatever small shreds of dignity they had left. Yet, despite the humiliation, it was precisely these resilient, overlooked weeds that saved countless thousands of men, women, and children from the ravages of scurvy, severe vitamin deficiencies, and outright starvation. And the undisputed king of this completely free, wild supermarket was the globally despised, ubiquitous dandelion. The very plant that modern suburban homeowners spend millions of dollars annually trying to eradicate with toxic chemical herbicides and gas-powered mowers was viewed by the survivors of the Depression as a literal life-saving superfood. In the very early spring, long before any planted garden crops were ready to harvest, and after months of surviving on a bleak diet of preserved roots and starches, the young, tender leaves of the dandelion were aggressively harvested for fresh salads. While the leaves were inherently bitter, they were an absolute nutritional powerhouse, exploding with vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, and calcium. To successfully combat the harsh bitterness, housewives would employ clever culinary tricks, such as blanching the greens in boiling salt water or tossing them in a hot, savory dressing made from a splash of vinegar, and the highly prized rendered fat from a scrap of bacon. The bright, cheerful yellow flowers were entirely harvested to brew surprisingly complex, delicious dandelion wine, which, during the dry years of Prohibition and the crushing gloom of widespread poverty, provided a rare, much-needed source of joy and relaxation. But perhaps the most vital use of the plant came in the autumn. The deep, stubborn taproots of the dandelion were painstakingly dug up, vigorously scrubbed clean of dirt, roasted in a hot oven until they turned a brittle, dark chocolate brown, and then ground into a coarse powder. This roasted powder was heavily relied upon as a direct substitute for coffee. Real coffee beans were an imported luxury completely out of reach for the majority of the working class. But the roasted dandelion root produced a hot, dark, slightly bitter beverage that successfully mimicked the flavor profile of coffee, providing the deep psychological comfort of maintaining a normal morning ritual when nothing else in life was normal. But the dandelion was far from the only wild resource utilized. Absolutely everything edible was brought into the kitchen: wild lamb's quarters, which were steamed and eaten exactly like spinach; stinging nettles, which, despite their intimidating defense mechanism, were harvested with thick gloves and boiled into rich, iron-heavy spring soups. The boiling completely neutralized the stinging acid. Wild garlic, wild onions, and thick, succulent purslane that stubbornly grew straight out of the cracks in concrete sidewalks. Families spent hours gathering wild blackberries, tough hickory nuts, and the notoriously difficult black walnuts. Harvesting black walnuts was a grueling, messy nightmare due to their incredibly thick green outer husks that had to be smashed off with hammers, releasing a potent dark dye that would deeply stain a forager's hands a sickly brownish black for weeks. A very public, undeniable sign that you were relying on the woods for your dinner. The contrast between this hyper-local resourcefulness in our modern food system is staggering and deeply humbling. We currently exist in a sanitized, highly artificial world where we expect our food to be perfectly symmetrical, devoid of any blemishes, shrink-wrapped in sterile plastic, and resting under bright fluorescent lights on a store shelf. We have completely severed our ancient connection to the earth, entirely forgetting that nature is incredibly, overwhelmingly generous to those who simply know how to look down at their feet. I am certainly not advocating that you should immediately walk to the edge of a busy, polluted highway tomorrow morning to harvest nettles in our modern industrial landscape that could be genuinely dangerous due to exhaust fumes, runoff, and heavy pesticide use. However, the profound underlying lesson of this era of survival is the vital importance of appreciating seasonality, utilizing hyper-local resources, and refusing to turn your nose up at cheap, unpretentious, basic ingredients. If we can train ourselves to stop paying exorbitant premiums for flashy brand names, unnecessary plastic packaging, and out-of-season exotic produce shipped from halfway across the globe, and instead refocus our diets on the most simple, fundamental gifts of the earth, seasonal root vegetables, dry legumes, hardy cabbages, and local staples, we will quickly discover that feeding a family a deeply nutritious, healthy diet can be achieved for mere pennies. Our ancestors successfully survived the greatest economic collapse in modern history because they possessed the sheer ingenuity to see immense life-saving wealth exactly where everyone else saw only useless weeds. And this powerful ability to fundamentally change your perspective on value remains the single most powerful tool for financial survival in any era. When we look at the modern consumer landscape, we are surrounded by a phenomenon known as planned obsolescence. The smartphones in our pockets, the washing machines in our laundry rooms, and the fast fashion garments in our closets are intentionally engineered by manufacturers to break down, wear out, or become culturally obsolete within a shockingly short time frame. We have been aggressively conditioned by decades of advertising to believe that when a toaster stops popping or a sock develops a small hole in the heel, the only logical acceptable response is to throw the offending item into the garbage and immediately purchase a brand new replacement. We view repair as an inconvenience, a waste of our precious time, or simply an impossible task due to glued-together electronics and impossibly cheap synthetic fabrics. But in the crushing, unforgiving reality of the 1930s, this modern throwaway mindset would have guaranteed a family's financial ruin and physical suffering. During the Great Depression, the absolute most valuable skill a human being could possess was the ability to repair, maintain, and endlessly extend the lifespan of the physical objects they already owned. This was the era of the make do and mend philosophy, a survival doctrine born not out of environmental consciousness, but out of stark, terrifying desperation. Nowhere was this philosophy more evident or more painful than in the maintenance of footwear. Today, many of us own a half-dozen pairs of shoes for different occasions, often discarding them the moment the foam sole loses its spring or the fabric scuffs. In the 1930s, a pair of thick leather shoes was a massive, often unattainable financial investment. Children routinely walked barefoot from the first warm days of spring until the first bitter frosts of late autumn, simply to save the precious leather soles of their only pair of shoes for the unforgiving winter. When those leather soles inevitably wore thin and terrifying holes began to appear, exposing bare skin to the freezing pavement, buying new shoes was completely out of the question for millions of Americans. Instead, families resorted to cutting thick pieces of discarded cardboard, often salvaged from grocery store boxes, and meticulously shaping them to fit inside the shoe as a makeshift, desperate barrier against the cold, wet ground. Imagine the physical reality of this. walking miles to school or to a factory seeking work, feeling the damp, freezing moisture seep instantly through the cardboard the moment you stepped in a puddle, the cardboard disintegrating into a soggy, uncomfortable mess against your bare foot by the end of the day, only to dry it out by the stove at night and cut a fresh piece the next morning. It was a daily, physical reminder of poverty. But alongside this desperation existed a profound, unspoken social hierarchy based entirely on the art of repair. In the tightly knit, struggling communities of the Depression, poverty was universal. But how you handled that poverty dictated your social standing and your dignity. To walk around with an unpatched hole in your trousers or a torn elbow in your shirt was a sign of defeat. It signaled to the world that you had given up, that your family had lost its pride and succumbed to the crushing weight of the era. However, to walk around in a garment that was heavily patched, beautifully darned, and meticulously repaired, even if the patches were made of mismatched flour sacks, was a badge of absolute honor. It was a visual broadcast to your neighbors that despite the fact that you had no money, your household maintained its self-respect, its work ethic, and its dignity. Mothers would spend countless exhausting hours after the children had gone to bed, sitting close to the fading warmth of the kitchen stove or huddled under the dim flickering light of a kerosene lamp, engaging in the grueling, highly skilled labor of darning. Using a smooth wooden darning egg slipped inside the toe or heel of a worn wool sock, they would use a needle and thread to literally reweave the missing fabric, recreating the structural integrity of the textile thread by thread. They turned frayed collars inside out, restitched torn leather harnesses, glued and clamped broken wooden chair legs, and sharpened dull knives on river stones until the blades were thin slivers of steel. They understood that the physical goods they owned represented hours of human labor and hard-earned capital, and allowing them to simply decay was a moral failure. Applying this relentless, unforgiving standard of maintenance to our modern lives would fundamentally shatter our monthly budgets. We hemorrhage thousands of dollars a year by outsourcing basic maintenance and blindly replacing items that require only a few minutes of care or a $5 replacement part. By reclaiming the lost art of basic sewing, learning to troubleshoot minor appliance repairs through free online resources, investing in high-quality items designed to be repaired, and, most importantly, stripping away the modern toxic stigma that associates repaired goods with poverty, we can instantly insulate our bank accounts. The make-do and mend mindset forces us to take extreme ownership of our possessions, transforming us from passive, helpless consumers into capable, resilient caretakers of our own wealth. When we look at the modern American suburban landscape, we see millions of acres of manicured, perfectly green grass lawns. We spend billions of dollars annually on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, toxic broadleaf herbicides, and massive amounts of treated potable drinking water simply to maintain a carpet of non-native grass that serves absolutely no biological or financial purpose other than projecting an image of middle-class conformity. We mow it, poison it, water it, and then throw the clippings away. To a survivor of the Great Depression, this modern obsession with the sterile, unproductive lawn would look like utter, incomprehensible madness. In the 1930s, every single square inch of accessible sunlit dirt was viewed not as a decorative canvas, but as a critical, life-saving engine for generating calories. Before the famous victory gardens of World War II were popularized through massive government propaganda campaigns, there were the relief gardens and thrift gardens of the Great Depression, born out of the immediate, terrifying threat of nationwide starvation. When the massive industrial breadlines grew too long and local municipal relief funds completely dried up, city governments and charitable organizations realized that handing out cash was unsustainable. Instead, they began handing out hoes, shovels, and small paper packets of seeds. Vacant city lots, abandoned industrial sites, dusty median strips, and small residential backyards were aggressively torn up and converted into highly productive agricultural zones. For millions of unemployed men and women who had lost their life savings in the bank collapses, the act of plunging their hands into the dark, cool earth to plant a seed was not just about securing food. It was a profound psychological lifeline. In a world where they had absolutely zero control over the economy, the stock market, or whether they would be hired for a day of grueling manual labor, the garden offered a sacred space of direct cause and effect. If they worked hard, pulled the weeds, carried buckets of water, and protected the tender shoots, the earth would predictably and faithfully reward them with sustenance. It was a daily, tangible victory in a decade defined by unrelenting, crushing defeat. But the true secret of these Depression-era gardens was their incredible, ruthless efficiency. These were not casual, aesthetic hobby gardens featuring a few delicate heirloom tomatoes and decorative marigolds. These were dense, high-yield survival plots designed to produce the maximum amount of storable, calorie-dense food per square foot. Families focused heavily on growing potatoes, winter squash, tough cabbages, dry beans, and hardy root vegetables like turnips and carrots, crops that could be easily preserved in the root cellars we discussed earlier to sustain the family through the freezing winter months. Furthermore, they operated on a strict, non-negotiable $0 budget. There was no money to purchase commercial chemical fertilizers or bags of sterile potting soil from a garden center. Instead, they relied on extreme, hyper-local composting. Absolutely every single piece of organic matter generated by the household was returned to the soil. Crushed eggshells, the bitter grounds from roasted dandelion coffee, the nutrient-rich wood ash from the heating stove, and whatever animal manure could be scavenged from local farms or passing horses. They built incredibly rich, fertile soil out of literal garbage, turning household waste into the very foundation of their future meals. Equally important was the absolute necessity of seed saving. Buying a new packet of seeds every spring was a luxury few could afford. At the end of the harvest, the absolute best, most robust tomato, the largest bean pod, and the healthiest ear of corn were strictly forbidden from being eaten. They were carefully left on the vine to fully mature and dry out. The seeds were then painstakingly extracted, dried on torn pieces of newspaper, cataloged and stored in cool, dark glass jars to be planted the following spring. Through this process, families slowly developed their own hyper-local, deeply adapted varieties of vegetables that were perfectly suited to their specific backyard microclimate, completely insulating themselves from the commercial agricultural supply chain. Today, we complain bitterly about the skyrocketing, hyperinflated prices of fresh organic produce at the grocery store. Yet we sit comfortably inside homes surrounded by unused, perfectly arable land. The financial mathematics of growing your own food remain as staggeringly profitable today as they were in 1933. A modern packet of seeds costs roughly $2 or $3. With a few months of basic care, sunlight, and water, that single $3 investment can easily yield hundreds of dollars worth of fresh, high-quality food. You don't need a sprawling 10-acre farm to dramatically impact your grocery bill. Even converting a small, sunny patch of your useless grass lawn into a dense bed of high-yield crops like herbs, tomatoes, and leafy greens can immediately eliminate the most expensive, highly perishable items from your weekly shopping list. The Depression-era garden teaches us that true financial independence doesn't come from earning a higher salary to pay inflated supermarket prices. It comes from literally growing your own wealth straight out of the dirt beneath your feet. One of the most terrifying visceral shocks of the Great Depression was the sudden, catastrophic evaporation of physical cash. When the fragile banking system systematically collapsed across the United States in the early 1930s, millions of hardworking families woke up to discover that their life savings, the money they had spent decades bleeding and sweating to accumulate, had simply vanished into thin air overnight. There was no FDIC insurance, no digital safety net, and no government bailout for the common worker. The doors of the banks were padlocked, and the cash supply in local communities completely dried up. We live in a hyper-financialized 2026, where every single human interaction seems to require a digital transaction, a credit card swipe, or an app subscription. We literally buy the time of others to clean our houses, fix our cars, deliver our food, and entertain our children. But how do you survive, let alone thrive, in a society where the official medium of exchange has completely disappeared? The survivors of the Depression did not simply sit down and wait to die. Instead, they immediately reverted to the oldest, most resilient economic system in human history, the barter system and the localized shadow economy. When you strip away the printed paper money and the abstract concept of banking, you are left with the raw, undeniable truth of human economics. Value is simply the exchange of human labor, physical skills, and tangible goods. In the 1930s, because nobody had cash to pay for services, communities were forced to look inward and heavily rely on each other to survive. A local country doctor might spend the entire night delivering a baby in a drafty farmhouse. Knowing the family had absolutely no money to pay his medical fee, he wouldn't send them to collections. Instead, he would gladly accept payment in the form of 24 fresh eggs, a cord of split firewood to heat his clinic, or a beautifully hand-stitched quilt. A skilled carpenter who was out of work might agree to repair the leaking roof of a local baker in direct exchange for a guaranteed loaf of fresh bread every morning for a month. Women organized complex, informal neighborhood networks, trading crucial childcare duties so that others could go work grueling shifts in factories, or swapping their mending and sewing skills for a portion of a neighbor's vegetable harvest. This hyper-localized economy operated entirely outside the purview of banks, tax collectors, and corporate structures. It was an economy built on immense trust, intense community bonds, and the undeniable recognition of individual human skills. It was also an era characterized by a profound, heartbreaking solidarity among the destitute. The most famous example of this was the legendary Hobo Code. Millions of desperate, unemployed men took to the railways, riding in dangerous, freezing boxcars across the country in a desperate search for any kind of manual labor. These transient workers developed a complex, secret visual language of symbols drawn with chalk or coal on fence posts, bridges, and barn doors. A specific symbol might indicate that the woman in a particular house was kind-hearted and would offer a hot plate of food in direct exchange for chopping a pile of firewood. Another symbol might warn that the local sheriff was violent and the town should be avoided, or that a vicious dog lived in the yard. It was a vast underground network of mutual aid, built on the understanding that today's provider could easily be tomorrow's beggar. The modern application of this forgotten survival tactic is incredibly powerful, yet almost entirely ignored by a society obsessed with maximizing taxable, digital income. Today, we automatically default to paying exorbitant, highly taxed cash prices for every single service we require, effectively bleeding our budgets dry. We have forgotten how to leverage our own inherent skills and community networks. By consciously stepping outside the traditional cash economy and reviving the art of the barter, you can save thousands of dollars a year. If you are an accountant, you could offer to do the annual taxes for a local mechanic in exchange for him replacing the transmission in your car. If you are a graphic designer, you can trade your digital services to a local farmer in exchange for a season's worth of fresh produce. By trading direct value for direct value, you completely bypass the inflation, the massive taxation, and the corporate profit margins that drain modern wealth. The Depression-era shadow economy teaches us that your true net worth is not the number printed on your bank statement. It is the physical skills you possess and the strength of the community you have built around yourself. To truly understand the absolute peak of Depression-era survival, we must return to the kitchen and examine the absolute fanatical devotion to the concept of zero-waste cooking. In modern 2026, our kitchens are designed for rapid convenience and massive unseen disposal. We trim the fat off our steaks and throw it in the trash. We peel our carrots and potatoes and scrape the skins into the garbage disposal. We buy a roasted chicken, eat the breast meat, and toss the entire skeletal carcass into the bin. We treat the byproducts of our food as irritating garbage to be hidden away. But to a housewife in 1933, every single one of those disposed items represented highly valuable hard-won calories that were desperately needed to keep her family alive. In the Depression kitchen, the line between food and garbage was pushed to its absolute microscopic limit, and the most revered, carefully guarded resource in this grueling daily battle against starvation was the simple glass jar of rendered fat sitting permanently on the back of the hot stove. In a time when butter was an unthinkable astronomical luxury and commercial cooking oils were virtually non-existent for the poor, animal fat was literal liquid gold. If a family was incredibly lucky enough to afford a small, cheap cut of pork, a few strips of bacon, or a tough piece of beef, absolutely nothing was wasted. The meat was cooked slowly, and every single drop of grease that melted away was painstakingly collected, strained through cheesecloth to remove any impurities, and poured into a dedicated glass jar. This rendered fat became the foundational currency of the entire kitchen. It was the crucial ingredient that made the flaky crust of the miraculous water pie possible. It was used to fry the bitter dandelion greens to make them palatable. It was heavily smeared on stale, hard bread to provide dense, necessary calories for men heading out to perform grueling manual labor. In the most desperate, freezing months of the winter, if the family ran completely out of commercial soap, that very same jar of saved, rendered bacon fat would be taken out to the yard, boiled in a massive iron kettle with harsh lye extracted from wood ashes and chemically transformed into bars of crude, highly effective laundry and body soap. The fat was not waste. It was the essential multi-purpose fuel of the entire household ecosystem. This extreme, reverent utilization extended to absolutely every scrap of food that crossed the threshold. Meat was incredibly rare, so when a bone was acquired, perhaps a cheap soup bone begged from the local butcher for a few pennies, it was treated with the utmost respect. The bone wasn't just boiled once for a quick soup. It was cracked open with a hammer to expose the rich, calorie-dense marrow inside, and then it was boiled, simmered, and reduced on the back of the stove for days on end. The acidic addition of a splash of vinegar would slowly, deliberately, draw out every single microgram of calcium, collagen, and mineral content from the hard bone matrix, resulting in a thick, gelatinous, deeply nourishing broth that served as a powerful, healing base for whatever meager vegetable scraps could be scavenged. Potato peels, rather than being thrown to the pigs, were carefully washed, tossed with a tiny drop of that precious saved bacon grease, and heavily roasted in the oven until they were dark, crispy, and delicious, a zero-cost snack that provided vital dietary fiber and vitamins. If milk was accidentally left out and turned unpleasantly sour, it was never poured down the drain. The acidic, clabbered milk was recognized as the perfect, scientifically ideal ingredient to react with baking soda, producing incredibly light, fluffy, and tender biscuits. This is the ultimate final secret of the era. Frugality was not a series of clever little hacks or a temporary annoying budgeting phase to get through a bad month. It was a comprehensive, all-encompassing worldview. It was an intense, unrelenting awareness of the exact value of every single resource, no matter how small, ugly, or seemingly insignificant. Modern society has sold us the incredibly dangerous, financially draining lie that convenience is king and that throwing things away is a sign of progress and hygiene. But by adopting the relentless zero-waste mentality of the 1930s kitchen, modern families can unlock massive hidden reserves of wealth right inside their own homes. When you stop viewing the carcass of a chicken as trash and start viewing it as the foundation for a week's worth of free, highly nutritious meals, when you learn to utilize the fats, the peels, the stems, and the leftovers with respect and imagination, you effectively plug the massive silent financial leak that drains the modern household. The women of the Great Depression survived the darkest economic abyss in modern history, not because they had money, but because they possessed the profound, unyielding wisdom to extract maximum, life-saving value out of the very things the rest of the world throws away.